Hey everyone, welcome back to the GEB America podcast where we connect with leaders, visionaries, and change makers. I'm your host, David Groves. And today we welcome Ben Peterson to the show. Ben is the founder of Engage Your Destiny. It's an organization dedicated to helping veterans and their families as they find healing and purpose through Jesus. And he's got a really cool story about what he's done and in the journey he's been on. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the speakers and not necessarily those of GEB America, Oral Roberts University, or their employees. This program is not intended to offer investment, financial, medical, legal, or any other advice. Viewers should consult a subject matter professional regarding any such matters.
Thanks for having me, man. Fun to be here.
So let's just start right from the beginning. Can you share a little bit about like this path you've been on? I know you were in the military and now you work with both veterans and active duty personnel. Tell us kind of how you even ended up down this path and ultimately starting Engage Your Destiny.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a family where, the greatest thing you could do with your life is serve this nation in combat. And when I was just a teen, like a 12, 13, 14-year-old, my dad was helping World War II veterans get healed and find peace by telling their stories. And so I got to spend time, my dad would have veterans over night after night. He'd go over to veterans' homes and help them tell their stories. He even worked with a Bataan Death March survivor who had been through, basically 14 days of no sleep, no water, no food across the Philippines where like 70% of the men died. And he was a survivor of that whole thing. And my dad spent like 2 years with that guy. And I remember just watching these incredible men heal and go through their stories. And it was just like, man, these are the greatest humans we have in our country. And I just wanted to be one, and the way that I would really connect with my dad is by watching war movies. That was kind of our thing. And so, when 9/11 happened, I knew what I wanted to go do and go fight for our country. And so at 17, I joined the military and went off to war at 21.
Wow. So tell us about a little bit about that. So you were Army?
Yep, I was in the Army.
And tell us about kind of like the theaters you were involved in.
Yeah, so I joined the military to be in the Special Forces. I had an 18 X-ray slot, and I lost that opportunity because I'm colorblind. And so that's very interesting with my 2-year-old son. By the way, I have him name the colors before I do. So that was challenging to lose that opportunity, but it was definitely God's calling on my life. And I actually had an opportunity to, I remember the recruiter pulled me aside and he said, I can get you the answers to the colorblind test and get you to retake it, and there was just something in me that just said, this isn't, I'm not going to lie. Like this isn't God's path for my life. And so joining the Army, became a chaplain's assistant. So I was supporting the chaplain in ministry and then his combat, basically bodyguard as we were moving throughout the country. And I went to Iraq in 2008 and 2009 during the surge. And that was my main time in combat.
Wow. So any unique stories or anything from that you can share?
Absolutely. When you're doing ministry in a war zone, you're fighting a different fight. I never had to pull the trigger while I was over there, but first week in combat, we lost 7 guys in a helicopter that went down. A couple of days after that, an NCO walked into a porta-john and blew his head off. And, so I go from, planning and executing a memorial service and supporting soldiers as they're mourning the death of their brothers. And then, now we've got an NCO that's committed suicide. And so now we're a part of that whole healing process and figuring all of that out. And so that, those first 2 weeks of combat, I got a pretty good idea of, man, we're not playing with toy bullets, and this is the real deal of spiritual warfare. And so, that just kind of gives you a snapshot. And then, we were a combat aviation brigade, so we flew medevacs, gunships, and, rides in between bases. And so basically, anyone who called in a medevac who was hit, in 2008 or 2009, or called in a gunship, because it was, they needed that support or rode between a base, it was more than likely our guys that got them around. Wow. So that was our mission, and that was our life, and that was our operational tempo, was to support the ministry of everything that was going on those missions.
So we know that, it's well known that veterans face a lot of challenges when they come back, the PTSD and both the emotional and spiritual wounds. But I know you're working with active duty personnel as well.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing, in current times, and then also what are the veterans really dealing with, and how do you guys help them with Engage Your Destiny?
Yeah, I think there's a big issue that most people don't understand is that a lot of people join the military because they're looking for a way out. And especially in the last, I know things have kind of changed with the election, but the majority of people who are joining the military are not doing so for patriotic reasons or because of their family. They're doing it because they're trying to get away from wherever they've come from, and so we have a ministry full-time on active duty basis that's doing direct evangelism and discipleship and helping soldiers come to Christ and walk with Jesus and know what it means to, become a warrior for Christ. And, just this last week, I was at one of our locations in Alaska, and I was with a soldier who was a former Latin Kings, gang member. At least he came from that family, and grew up around all the evil things that you can imagine. And at 18, he decided to join the military, and now he's starting to learn to follow Jesus. And so, there's a lot of significant challenges that I think people are joining and they're dealing with before they even come into the military. And then the operational tempo right now, as post COVID, with the vaccine mandates and things like that, like a lot of people left the military. And so you had a vacuum of people that left. And that has been very, very felt in the military, where you still have a very strong operational tempo. There's still conflicts happening in Syria. There's still conflicts happening in Iraq. You still have the Horn of Africa, where there's a lot of terrorism happening there. You have groups that are going there. You also have the war in Ukraine, which we've been supporting and sending soldiers over to be a show of force. And so there's still tons of things happening around the world where the military is still the defenders of freedom. And when you have less people to support you and less leadership to support because of that vacuum, it's created a lot of stress and a lot of younger people that have been kind of pushed into positions that maybe they weren't ready for. And the military is feeling that in a very big way.
Yeah. So I guess, with that vacuum created by so many leaving, you had a lot of senior leadership, you had a lot of experience.
A lot.
That stepped out, and now that has to be filled. And also I think we haven't had near the feeling of patriotism in our country. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that's returning.
Absolutely.
For sure. So talk a little bit about the veterans, that those that have left maybe for one reason or another, or they just, they retired, they were in for a certain amount of time. How are you guys helping? And I know you also help families.
Yeah. A lot of our outreach has been, just meeting soldiers and meeting veterans. Obviously, we do all of our in-person activities are on bases. The way that we've been supporting veterans has just been through our digital presence and reaching them and telling them they're not alone and helping them get into programs that could really transform their lives. And so we have a network of organizations that do mental, emotional, physical healing. And we've kind of been that outreach tool where the more we do digitally, the more veterans kind of surface and they're willing to put their hand up and take a knee and say, hey, I need some help. One of the big issues, America is the most isolated and individualized country in the world by many, many, many times. And so when you enter into the military, you learn how to do life as a tribe. That's why the Engage Your Destiny logo is a quill, because it signifies leadership, as leaders in Roman times would have a quill in their helmet, but also it signifies tribe and community. Mm-hmm. And so we're building communities and raising leaders to be warriors for Christ, in these tribes. But when you leave the military, you lose that tribe. You lose that, that community. And most people are like, man, you miss your band of brothers and all that kind of stuff. But dude, the psychological effects, like go back to the 1700s and look at if you took a Native American out of their tribe, they were a mess. But if you took a white man and you put him in a tribe, he flourished. And so we were born for community. We were born for tribe. We were born for relationship. And when you are in the military, you're in such a tight community that suffers together, that does everything together. And then when you leave that and you go into the most isolated environment in the world, it's unbelievably jarring. And that is what has caused so many of the deaths in our country from suicide, is it is that isolation factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think the enemy, the first thing he tries to do is to isolate you. Whether you're somebody that's just a lay person, you're just a civilian, and you kind of fall into that trap of maybe not attending church regularly, not being a part of community, and how important really that's why Paul said, don't forsake that assembly.
Yeah.
You need that. You need those people around you for not just the good times, and when the bad times come, and when you're in a difficult moment. We have a lot of foxhole Christians, that idea of they only pray, they only seek God when they're in crisis. And so, man, that's just so important. And I guess that as a civilian, I don't really think of, that band of brothers, and that community that's there, that when you take that away, that's part of, there's probably a lot of things that have happened and they've been a part of and they've seen that wears on them, but losing that brotherhood, I could see why that would be really just a breeding ground for really terrible things. And
for sure.
So that's really great the way you guys are doing that. So talk about the digital, like how can people connect? And if you're like me, you're not a veteran, but you want to be engaged and help in any way with what you guys are doing, share that.
So it's the Engage Your Destiny podcast. And we've got a pretty strong presence on pray.com. So I would encourage you guys, there's so many great leaders on pray.com to download the pray.com app. We're just launching our video podcast here in January. And we're telling the stories of veterans and military from a faith perspective. So kind of think like Sean Ryan's show, but for faith, for veterans. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we just told the story of a guy who was in the cafeteria in Columbine where those bombs were supposed to go off. He survived Columbine, joined the Marine Corps. He was in the Battle of Najaf. Which was one of the worst battles that we had in Iraq, and then he became a cop for 11 years. And so, just telling his story of faith and his journey, and so we're really excited to launch that. So be on the lookout for that through the Engage Your Destiny podcast in January. And that's how veterans, military families can get engaged, or just the warriors at heart from a military perspective. Paul said, "Be a good soldier." For Christ. And so I think we're all called to be soldiers for Christ, that, and to act in such a way where we're actually pleasing the commander who's enlisted us. I mean, that's all very military language. Mm-hmm. And that's Paul talking to Timothy, who never served in the military. So I think that's very, very relevant for our time.
It is. Well, for our friends that are watching on pray.com, of course, we love pray.com, GB America. We have our presence there. And but if you're on YouTube or you're listening on Spotify or Apple or any of the other podcast platforms, be sure you look in the show notes. I've got links there where you can find that out. Of course, you can go to pray.com/GEB America and find your way to what Ben is doing there with Engage Your Destiny. So you're doing things in the active realm. You're going in and doing in-person events. What do those look like?
Yeah, so we found a massive need with young soldiers and how they can navigate their emotions in a healthy way by bringing the cell phone about. It has removed social interaction by a dramatic fashion, and so we're finding that young people, their emotional bandwidth is about, if you're 18, it's about the bandwidth of a 15-year-old, because you just haven't had the emotional exposure because of the phone. And so, even when we have events, if a soldier doesn't have someone to talk to or feels like they don't fit in, they'll just go sit on their phone. And, I wasn't able to do that when I was a kid. You were forced to go into social interaction. Well, now I can just go hide on this piece of technology. And so that has really, made a massive impact on the young generation with their ability to connect with each other, which is actually what they need. And what we all need is that connection. And so we train soldiers in emotional intelligence and helping them understand their emotions, where their emotions come from, why they have the emotions they have, for the purpose so that they can be able to connect with self-awareness and understand who they are and why they are the way they are, so that they can navigate those emotions in a healthy way. And then from there, we just invite soldiers to stick around and hear about our faith. And then it's that point that we share our faith, we share what Jesus has done in our lives, and then we invite them to come and to join us and to get into Bible studies with us and to get into really a decentralized model of how we can raise up soldiers as leaders to go and take ownership over reading the Word and how they lead soldiers around them. And so we're building leaders in these tribes. And so we're on 3 bases right now, expanding to 5 next year. And so we have that presence on these bases where our leaders are going and living out that model. And we're growing like wildfire. It's so exciting.
Yeah, it's such a real need for sure. Let's talk a little bit about our world right now, because you have a unique perspective in what you've done and where you've been, and then not just that, the engagement that you have with current soldiers and those that are going into these in these spaces. The geopolitical world. What is it that you would like our viewers to know about what is happening beyond our borders here in the U.S.?
Well, I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is that when the Cold War took place and we were moving through World War II, the greatest economic shift took place because the United States made the world safe. It made it safe for ships to be able to get to other countries and locations. When that happened, so take Venezuela or let's take some countries in South America where they cannot grow or get fertilizer on a mass scale in order to do large scale farming, right? The largest exporter of fertilizer in the world is Russia. Okay, so by making the world safe, fertilizer from Russia was able to get to countries all over the world for the purpose of farming and expansion. When the United States is not leading, as it has not been for the last 4 years, the world becomes less safe. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen that in the Middle East. We've seen that in Russia. Or in China beginning to bully Taiwan. All of these different pieces. And so then you also have pirates. You have people that rise up and they begin to attack ships, which we began to see here in the last 2 years as the Navy has been pulling back. Now, the American Navy is 7 times more powerful than all of the other navies in the world combined. And under the lack of ability for the Navy to recruit, we've had to shut down numerous ships because we just don't have the people to man them. Right. And so as, people are like, well, why do you need this massive defense spending budget? Well, I'll tell you why, because the world is a very, very dangerous and unstable place. And we have built up this expectation that the seas are safe and the airways are safe and you can go and you can trade and you can do all these things. Well, when America's not leading and they're not taking the charge in how to make the world safe, being the world police as we've been demonized, well, then it's no longer safe for trade, which turns everything upside down. And so Donald Trump coming back into leadership is incredible for the world because he leads with power. And I think one of the other things that people don't understand is that in the Middle East, they don't understand diplomacy. They don't understand democracy. That's not how they work. They work through power. So to give you an example, when I was in Iraq, I remember we were on this mission and we were bringing like food and goods and things to this local town. And we went in there and I had my M16 in front of me and we had these candies and different things. And the kids went and they would slap my M16 like out of the way to get to stuff. They had no respect for it. But when one of our NCOs pulled out a pistol and held it up, they ran in terror. So in those locations, these kids would be bullied and they would get beaten and abused by the local police with their pistols. And so they don't have respect for authority, don't have respect for, this is who I am because I am. They have respect for power. And that is how the entire Middle East works. They think through power. And so when you try and lead in a weak way, as we have for the last 4 years, dude, they're not going to respect you. But all of a sudden, just by Donald Trump coming in, they know that he is not messing around. And so we need to take some comfort in how the world is going to have more order because it takes power in order to geopolitically be able to sustain our way of life.
Well, and I think that we know that the world is unsafe and is dangerous, and it's unfortunate that it's in a lot of ways has impacted how ministries work because missionaries are in these places. They're in harm's way already because the gospel is an offense to those in so many of these spaces that here in the United States we don't even really fully, I think, recognize what real persecution is. Being bullied, on social media is terrible, but it doesn't compare to the arrests and the people that are locked up for their faith or beaten or killed in some of these countries, and certainly the skirmishes that we see that happen in Africa between Christians and others. Do you think that there is any other things that American Christians can be doing besides praying and supporting? Are there some things that they can do to really help with like what Engage Your Destiny is doing or other organizations like yours?
There's some incredible foundations that are doing work. Obviously the child trafficking issue is enormous in this world, and America is one of the biggest, making the biggest impact and is targeting and trafficking the most amount of children. And so, getting involved with organizations like the Sentinel Foundation, getting involved in organizations like Run Ministries, getting involved with Engage Your Destiny, you're making an impact here. And you're making an impact with our military. You're making an impact with children around the world. You're making an impact in the Middle East. And so I do think, we have a lot of money that is sitting in donor advised funds. There's over like $20 billion is just sitting. It's not doing anything. And I think that's a massive problem of money that needs to be deployed to activate the work that needs to be done in our country and around the world. I also think that, there's a lot of money that goes to churches that just sits and pays for big buildings. And I'm a full believer in tithing. And we need to ensure, we've been a part of a local church for a few years now where, a lot of their money is going towards setting slaves free in Pakistan, right? Like they're getting involved in things that are going to make a difference around the world. And I think we need to be more minded about that instead of just, hey, we're going to build a bigger building to house more people. I just think we need to think differently as a church. And I challenge any pastor to that, to think differently about how we're going to go about spending our money and laying up our treasures here instead of in heaven, what that really means.
Yeah. Being the hands and feet of Jesus is going. And sometimes we can't physically go, but we certainly can send others by our resources. And I love it when I hear churches are so engaged with things like, the help in other countries with what's happening with trafficking, and then stateside helping with things like foster care and kids that are ending up here and are coming out of bad situations. Do you have any dreams for Engage Your Destiny that you're really, I know you talk about the podcast going video, and that's super cool. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about what's on the horizon for 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, we want to put our model of evangelism and discipleship on every major base in the world. So there's 54 major bases, and that's our goal for the next 20 years. Awesome. So we're in this expansion model right now so that when a soldier, airman, Marine, sailor, no matter what base they go to, that after they finish their time of service and they move to another base, Engage Your Destiny is there, and they have a community to support them to help them grow their faith. And just yesterday, one of the guys that we've been ministering to and really discipling for over a year, called one of my guys and was just bawling on the phone, just saying, "Engage Your Destiny changed my life." And he's getting ready to get out of the military. And so now he's leaving the military on mission. He wants to go into ministry, and he wants to win people to Christ, and he wants to advance the kingdom. And so our vision is that, no matter where you are, Engage Your Destiny is there to support you, to support your family, to support your marriage. We do marriage retreats at all of our bases, and that they can go and they can have that Christ-centered experience with a group of people that are truly going to walk with them. And so, our mission is to reach the defenders of this nation and to see the Great Commission lived out in the military.
That's awesome. Well, for those of you that are listening and you can't look at show notes, remember engageyourdestiny.com is the website. You can find them on all the social media platforms. And for those of you watching on YouTube and pray.com, there are links down below and in the show notes as well on the other platforms. Ben, I could talk to you all day, and I love I love talking about things when it comes to changing people's really their destinies, and that's what you guys are doing. It's so awesome.
Thanks.
And one quick question for you though, because you mentioned something at the beginning. You used to love to watch military movies with your dad.
Yeah.
What were a couple of your favorites?
Oh man, I mean, obviously, Saving Private Ryan was a big one, but we'd get into the old ones like Kelly's Heroes and The Bridge on the River Kwai. And then of course we were huge like John Wayne, like we needed the D-Day stuff, and all those old movies. We just loved it. Yeah,
there's a couple that I always really liked. One of them was The Sands of Iwo Jima.
Oh yeah, great movie.
Great movie. And then a little more modern, almost every either Memorial Day or around July 4th, I totally set myself down and I go through and watch Band of Brothers again.
Fun. Yep. That's the real deal.
Well, I will have your information in the show notes, and I just want to thank you for coming on. And
Thanks,
would you mind just praying for our audience and those that might be feeling led to support what you
Yeah.
guys are doing or what veterans need in this current landscape of our world.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lord, I just pray for every listener and where your heart is at today. And I just commission you and call you into the destiny that God has for your life, and for you to begin to align your heart with the mission that God has for you. And I just pray for a heart of surrender, that you would surrender every area of your life that you have never surrendered to God. Any self-will or addiction or ambition that just isn't him and it's not his best for you, that you would enter into a place of surrender into his plan for your life as the great commander and the great commissioner of your destiny. And Father, I pray for the persecuted church around the world, that you would be with them and give them strength and fill them with your Holy Spirit to endure. God, I pray for our military. I pray, God, that you would make them strong and that you would bring a harvest of revival in the military that shakes this nation. And God, I pray for our country. God, I pray that we would get into alignment with what you're doing and not with ourselves, and that we'd store up treasures in heaven, not here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, I love that. Yes, we're believing for revival in this country and the world, and revival in the military as well.
Amen.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Ben. I want to tell our audience that you can like, share, follow. If you're on YouTube, hit that bell so you'll be notified. Remember, we drop a new episode every Tuesday morning, and we'll see you next time on the GEB America podcast.
Thanks, guys.